Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's 30 at 3 live webinar. What we're going to be covering this week is going to be round-tripping models using SDS2 Connect between Revit Structure and SDS2. So a couple things I just want to mention before we get going here. The round-tripping capabilities of SDS2 Connect are going to actually be available to anyone at no cost. Okay, all you have to do is download the trial version of SDS2 Connect. That'll be a 30-day trial. When it actually expires, you can still use the import and export features of SDS2 Connect. Only if you wish to use the connection design or import and export connection design using SDS2 Connect do you actually need to purchase. Okay, so round tripping you can actually do without purchasing anything. Basically, if you don't purchase that, what's going to happen is you're just going to get like the location and the geometry of the members, section sizes, that sort of thing. It'd be kind of like more like just a simple CIS2 transfer. There are some advantages over CIS2 transfer, and we'll look at those here as we get going later on. But just wanted to point that out, that there is no cost to actually use the round tripping capabilities. This feature also comes standard with SDS2. I believe it was version 7.243 that we first added this into SDS2 to where we could import and export these XML files between Revit and SDS2. Okay, so the next question, or the next thing to talk about, would be what actually gets transferred with these files and with SDS2 Connect. Well, basically what we're going to transfer would be all the beams, okay, and we can include connections if SDS2 Connect has been purchased. Okay, same thing with columns. We can do columns and it can include connections. We can export vertical and horizontal braces, including connections. And then finally, we can include joists in the transfer. At this time, there is no connection design for joists incorporated to or incorporated in SDS2 Connect, so we won't see connections for joists transferred at this time. Okay. The next thing to point out, shouldn't have closed my PowerPoint here. The next thing to point out is kind of workflows, or what we can actually do with SDS2 Connect. Now, I do kind of have two workflows shown on the screen here. We can just use this as a one-time transfer, okay? So if I had a Revit model and I simply want to use a one-time transfer, I can export that out to a new SDS2 model to populate my SDS2 model, and then that can be it, okay? I could do that, vice versa. If I have an SDS2 model, I want to send that out to Revit, I can do that and then stop. I don't have to do any round tripping if I don't want to. If I just want that one-time transfer to get the model populated, I can do something like that. Okay. Then we could, if we go back up here to kind of the top workflow, we can take that after we exported it and we bring it to a new SDS2 model. We could go kind of two ways with that, okay? If we go that first route and we make modifications to our Revit model, we could do another export, and that would allow us to synchronize the SDS2 model with the Revit model so everything matched up. Okay? Or we could go a different route and make our modifications to the SDS2 model, and then we could export back out to the Revit model to synchronize that model and get that up to date with the SDS2 model at that point. So it kind of depends on how your workflow is, where the changes or which model the changes are going to be made. And again, Remember, connections don't have to be included in this. It's kind of optional. You can just use the transfer for location and geometry of your beams, columns, braces, joists, similar to a kind of an alternative to like a sys2 file. Okay, so the next thing then, let's go ahead and I'll kind of show you the workflow, actually kind of step through some of this and see how this all works. So I just have a simple model here. If I zoom in a little bit, now this is within Revit. I do have, we can see connections designed here. Haven't really made any changes to anything. These are basically just some simple connections. So I want to take this model and I actually need to get that into SDS2 to start my SDS2 model. So up here, under the SDS2 Connect tab on the toolbar here, we have 3 buttons pertaining to the round tripping. Now the first one that I'm going to talk about is the Setup Materials. So if I select Setup Materials, basically what this is just a simple mapping option. Okay, on the left-hand side you can see the different Revit families that I have mapped, and then in the middle, this is the material type that SDS2 is going to recognize those as that I want the export or import to map those families to. Okay, and then we have over here on the right the units that those families are in. If I need to add a family in here, I simply hit Add Families, browse to, and select the RFA, the family file, and then that should be added to the list. I can map it. When I'm done, I can go ahead and save that. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. Some of you, if anybody's tried this in the past, you know, in the beginning when we first came out with this, we didn't have this mapping option. Simply all we did was export the default Revit families, and that was it. So we had a lot of customers wanting some more of their custom families to be able to somehow be incorporated in this, so we had to give this mapping option in here to allow more of the custom families and whatnot to be included. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and cancel that. Now, the next thing we're going to do, I said I want to get this model into SDS2, so I'm going to come up here to my export option, and there's going to be several options in here for me. Now, the first one I'm going to do is I just want to simply export everything to SDS2 so I can export all the structural elements in this particular model. We'll touch on the rest of these as we go along here, but the first thing I want to do is just simply export all structural elements. Okay. I will get, once I select that, I will get another, this looks like the mapping window that I just showed you. Basically what's happened here is there's a family in this model that wasn't in that mapping window, so it automatically comes up and wants me to map that. Now the one it doesn't recognize is this one right here, the design data wide flange. I just changed the name to force it so it didn't recognize it properly. It does a pretty good job of guessing what the material type is. So here we can see it's guessing that it's a wide flange, and it really actually is. I can select the units, and then if I had to, I can go ahead and come out here, hit the family location. It's going to allow me to go out and pick where that family is and save it back to that mapping window through here. The other thing you'll notice is when I pull this selection down here for material type, I only have one selection for wide flange. If I need more selections, I can come down here, check the show all material types, and then that's going to give me a larger selection of the different types of material that I might need to select. So now I'm ready to go ahead and export. Since I see here that everything's mapped properly, I can simply hit the export button. And we're getting better results this time. Okay, so I just have a folder here called From Revit. I was practicing before here with this folder, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. And it's a good idea to keep track of these files that we're going to be using. Basically, the method that I kind of suggest maybe is typically you're always going to have some sort of project folder that you're using all the time. So why not create a folder inside your project folder called, transfer files or whatever, and then within there we can have a transfer file 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth, just so I kind of keep track of that. So I'm just creating this folder, and I'm going to call the first file that I export here, I'm just going to call it pass 1, so I know it's the first pass that I'm doing. And notice down at the bottom, the type is going to actually be an XML. So this is saving an XML file or creating an XML file is what we're using. Go ahead and save that. So we should have our file created now. And I do have my SDS2 modeling open down here already. We can see that. We can see I don't have any members in here. This is just a blank, brand new model. And what I'm going to do is I want to import this. So on our default toolbar over on the right-hand side, you will see some buttons to import from Revit, export to Revit, a couple others here. Or if you go to the model pull down to Revit, we have the options down here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and hit import, and I'll go out and select that file that I just created. Okay. Now the XML file that we use, it is actually kind of encrypted. So when SDS2 imports this, it has to decode all that information first, and then it reads that file in. So that's kind of what it's doing here right now. And then we're going to see this window to associate this SDS2 job with the name of the Revit file. We do have to click yes here before we actually get this imported. So basically what it does is it associates itself with that project. That way if there's future transfer files, it can only get transfer files. You can only import transfer files from that particular project so that you don't get them mixed up or import the incorrect transfer file from another project or something. Okay, so if I were to say no, it would cancel the whole thing. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to say yes, and then we'll see a summary of our different changes here. So we can see up at the top if we say beam W27 by 84, and it's going to be adding that. Okay. If I don't want it to add that, I can simply use the checkbox on the left. I can uncheck that. It wouldn't add it. Same thing you'll see later on we can do with additions or deletions from the model, changes, that sort of stuff. Okay. If I hit the print button down at the bottom, that's going to just give me a little bit more detailed summary. So up at the top we could see what Revit project that's coming from, the Revit version, the transfer file, and then what I want to point out to you here too is the transfer file sequence. Okay. So basically, every time we transfer this, it's going to set the sequence, and then next time it will increment up that sequence, and then the next time it'll get incremented again. This way, if it sees that someone selects the transfer file sequence 1 when you're on transfer file sequence 4, it'll say, hey, this is an old file. We don't want to import that, and it'll basically just stop the import then, since it would be using an old transfer file. Okay, then we just get basically the same printout summary of what we've seen in the previous screen. You could save that if you wanted for future reference or whatever. Another thing you might notice here, notice we have some plate definition changes. Okay, so the other thing that gets transferred would be your setup that affects connections. Okay, all the same setup that is in SDS2 is also incorporated into SDS2 Connect and Revit. So since that's the case, we don't want a different setup between the two models, so we've incorporated that into the transfer files so that when you transfer it, all the setup information is the same between the Revit and the SDS2 models. Okay, so I'll say OK here, and then we notice we get the same model here just in stick form right now as we had in the Revit model. Now, we are just simply importing member information and connection information. The easy way to think about it, if you're thinking, well, what connection information is transferred, basically the location of your members, and if I edit this, okay, so the location of the members is transferred, and just about everything stored within this member edit window right here is what will also get transferred. So, things like graphical connections, or if you're building your own connections, those things at this point don't get transferred because they're not stored within this member edit window, okay? Only the settings in here is what gets transferred. Okay. So now another thing to point out, in this model, we see a lot of things. Notice like our work points, where our work points are at. Notice they're in the most of the time in the correct position here. So if you have whoever's inputting the Revit model, if they've input that accurately, you've used good modeling practices, you're going to get a good transfer file, you're going to get an accurate model transferred into SDS2. There's a few mistakes, not too many in this particular model. Some of these are going to be easy to fix. Like this brace here, looks like it's pretty low. Might not be half nominal depth of our beams. So let's go ahead and just process and create solids so we can see this in a solid form. Okay, so now we get that in solid form. And again, if I look at this brace over here, notice how that work point is down below the actual supporting beam. I want that to be at half the nominal depth. Same thing with all the rest of these vertical braces. I want those to be at half the nominal depth of my beams, and some of them are not. So I'm just going to quickly use my change options in SDS2. So if I go to the Edit pull down, change options, set vertical brace work points to half nominal depth. Okay, it's going to ask me if I really want to do that. I'll say yes, give me a printout of which ones were updated, and we can see most of my braces needed to be updated because they're marked for processing now. I simply mark that for processing to take that change. Now if I zoom in there, now notice where my work point is for this particular brace. We're at half the nominal depth. Okay, so once you get it in, if you do have some problems, there are some tools like that to help us out in SDS2 to quickly make changes and get that to be more accurate. Now, we talked about doing just a simple one-time transfer from Revit to SDS2. If I were just doing a one-time transfer, this would be where I stopped. I wouldn't go on in this demonstration. This would just simply be it. Okay, I want to continue on with our workflow. So if I go back to my PowerPoint here and show you what we had, I could take two paths here. I could either make modifications to the SDS2 model, which I kind of already did with those braces, or I could make modifications to the Revit model. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So let's go back into the Revit model, and let's go in here to my second floor, and I'm going to turn the analytical model off so I don't see that, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to grab this floor to kind of hide that, so that's out of the way. Now, let's just say here that grid A is going to move, and I'm going to check out my license so that my connections will update for me. I'm going to move grid A a little bit to the left here. So I'll move. Yeah, let's just go 1'6". So in Revit, all my members there that fall on grid A should update as I move that. They're attached to grid A, and we can kind of see that outline as it's updating here, what they're going to be updated to. Okay, so that's updated, and we're still updating the connections quick. Okay, so that's done. Now, let's say we want to go ahead and get those changes. We want the SDS2 model synced back up. So I'm going to go to the Connect tab again. I'm going to go to Export, and I'm going to use all structural elements again. Okay, this is going to export this entire building. Again, I get this Verify Material Types up. Looks like everything's good in there, so I can export. And this time I'll call this one Pass 2 since it's the second transfer file. And let's go into SDS2. This time I'm going to use the Import button over here on the right side. Browse to and select the Pass 2 file that I created. And again, it's encrypted, so we're going to have to go through, basically decode that, and then we'll get the summary of changes here again like we did on the very first import. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit different. Notice now we have a piece mark and a member number there indicated, and then it's going to give us a description of what is actually changing. We can also use the magnifying glass here. That's going to zoom to fit to that piece. We can pan around, see, make sure that's actually going to be what we want to change. Again, you can uncheck that there. Now the other thing that you're going to notice, if I scroll down here, notice my vertical braces in here that it's indicating are the end locations are changing. So remember, after I imported, I changed the end locations. I did not sync that back to the Revit file before I exported again. So it's exporting all structural elements is what I did, and now it's trying to make that change back, or basically undo that change and sync everything up so everything gets back into sync and both models match up again. I don't want it to change those back, so I'm just going to go ahead and simply uncheck that. And actually there is one here, I believe, that I want to update the left end location, and it would be that one here. Remember, I moved what would have been grid A in Revit over. So that was my VB_59, and the left end location, I'm going to allow it to go ahead and still make that change so that updates properly. If I print the changes again, notice transfer file sequence now is 2, so it upped that sequence since it's a second transfer file. I'm going to go ahead and say OK, marks those for processing. Since it changed it, now I just simply have to process and create solids to actually apply those changes then. Okay, so there, basically, mostly what we did there was kind of change the location. Would have stretched some of these members a little bit with that change. I'm going to go back into the Revit model, make a few more changes. This time what I'm going to do is, well, maybe some of these section sizes need to change because of that. So I'll go ahead and select these here. I'm going to up that section size. Let's go W18 by 35. As we do that, it's updating connections, so that's part of the reason why it takes a moment there when I make the change. Let's increase the size of these here as well. Let's go W12 by 22. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of change the design here of the second floor a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the second floor. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to go ahead and delete this member right here, and then I'll add a couple more in perpendicular to the beams there. So let's add a beam. We want that on the second floor. We want that to be a girder. And we're going to go with a section size of just W12 by 26. We'll go 6 feet from that grid up there. And then same thing down here. We'll add a beam in here. Okay, so we made a deletion, we made some additions, we made some section size changes. Now we need to go ahead and sync the SDS2 model back up. So we'll go to the SDS2 Connect tab, and this time what I'm going to do is, instead of saying export all structural elements, I'm going to say export all modified structural elements. What that means is this should export all structural elements that have been changed since the last known state that the SDS2 model was in. Okay? The last known state in this particular case is the last time we did an export. It could be, if we were going from SDS2 to Revit, the last known state of that model could be the last time we imported into the Revit model. In this case, it's the last export. Okay. Again, we get to verify everything's okay in here, so I can export. And we'll do pass 3 for the file name. Now we just need to simply import into the SDS2 model again. Okay, we get our summary of changes again. Here we can see this one's being deleted. I can zoom to fit. That's the one that I did actually delete in the Revit model. Section size changes, some of those that I added are being added here. And then we get our braces again here. It's still wanting to update our braces. I don't want it to do that, so I'm going to uncheck that again so it doesn't update those. Say OK. We can see we get our changes there then. Again, I need to process and create solids to actually apply. It looks like we got some piece marking issues there. I'm not too concerned with that right now. And then we got our changes. If I edit this one here, notice the section size goes to an 18 by 35. Okay. Now another thing we might need to think about here is, and whoever's inputting, if it's our engineer inputting the Revit model, they may not be concerned with the rotation of the members on this roof and such, whereas myself as a detailer, as a fabricator, I need to have this exactly how it's going to be fabricated and erected, so that may actually need to be rotated in my model. So I'm going to go ahead and make that change here. So I'll just do a multi-edit on these beams here, and I'm going to set my web rotation to, let's go hip and valley there, and automatic. I'll change my connection type to be shear on both ends. I just want a shear connection. And I'm going to do the same thing with this beam here. Let's just go web normal and automatic. Make sure we get a shear connection on both ends. Process that. Okay, so now we get all that rotated like we might need it. The other thing I might need to do is, since grid A changed position, some of these were stretched out. This beam was left up here. Maybe we need that to be at the same location there, so I'm just going to go ahead and stretch this member here. We'll go from its endpoint to the endpoint of that beam, confirm the move. We'll do the move stretch here from exact point to exact point, and then we need to stretch this beam down. So let's do a move stretch from exact point to intersection of construction line and member. And now we get that. So now what I'm going to do is I want to make sure I have complete control over this. I want to only export these members that I made changes to. Those 4 are the ones that I changed since the last import from Revit. I want to sync these changes back up with the Revit model. So I'm going to select these, and then over here on my toolbar I have an option to export selected members to Revit. So I'll select that. I'm going to go back into that same folder I was using before where I was keeping track of my files, and this time I'll go past 4. I'm just going to add SDS2 at the end so I know it's going from SDS2 to Revit. And then in Revit, I'll use my import, select the file I want to import. Again, that first import I do, it's going to ask me if I want to associate it with the SDS2 job. Again, I do need to do this. If I don't, it will cancel the import. I get a summary of changes again. Here, if you hover over that, it'll give you a change. If you click on it, it expands that and gives that to you. I can use the magnifying glass to zoom to fit again. Another difference in here that you might notice is up at the top we have the option to import structural connections. So if we're not concerned with the connections in Revit, we can choose to skip those changes to connections by unchecking that option up top. I'm going to say OK there. It's going to go ahead and import these changes. We'll be able to see, notice the position change, rotated. And now we're getting everything synced back up with the SDS2 model so the engineer can see how that's actually going to be built then. Okay. Now one last thing I want to do, and then I'll kind of open it up to questions for a few minutes, is in the SDS2 model, maybe I have a beam out here that needs to be rolled. So I'm going to just edit this beam, and I'll add a rolling operation on the weak axis with a radius of, let's go 40 foot. So we get that roll. I might need to go ahead and stretch these members so that we're framing to the right spot. So I'll move stretch members from exact point to intersection construction line and member. So we get that. Notice our connection updated, okay, just like normally would in SDS2. Again, I just want to have control and export those 3 members, so I'll select those, export selected to Revit. Go to my same folder to keep track, and this time we'll go past 5_SDS2. And we'll go back to Revit and we'll import into Revit. Again, I get my change list, everything's okay, say okay, and then we should see these changes come through as well. So just wanted to demonstrate to you there, unlike CIS2, we are able to get the curved members or the rolled members in there. So there are a lot of advantages using this versus a CIS2 file. So just wanted to point that out. Now, you probably noticed earlier in the export pull down here in Revit, okay, there is a selected modified and a selected structural elements. It's grayed out right now, but we could do the same thing I was doing from SDS2, where if I were to select elements, I could have a little more control over that and export the selected modified or all selected structural elements, and it would only export those there. The other thing you'll notice here is we have an all structural elements to a new SDS2 job. Now, the only time you should need to use this is if the round tripping gets out of sync somehow, or you're having issues and you need to completely start from scratch, sending to a brand new SDS2 model after you've done it to a previous SDS2 model. This may be a little misleading in the words that we use when we're saying to a new SDS2 job. It's basically just a reset all round tripping settings is what that is. So that's the only time you should need to use that. And you may have noticed back in SDS2 we have similar options to where we have export to a new Revit project. Again, that's not necessarily just to a new Revit project. That is more a complete reset, all of the round tripping options. Okay, so this kind of concludes my portion and what I wanted to show here. So if anybody has any questions, I will stick around here for a while, and if you want to use the questions pane over in the GoToWebinar, they have their toolbar there. If you want to type any questions in that questions pane, I'll try to answer them as best I can. If I can't answer a question, I will find that out later and email it back. So feel free to type your questions in there that you may have. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions yet. Don't want to wait too terribly long. Remember, if you do have any questions come up later, feel free to email us here. Best email for this topic is probably going to be to email support@sds2connect.com. Otherwise, if you want to give us a call here, feel free to give us a call at 888-883-2492. Somebody here will be able to answer your question, and if not, get in touch with the right person who can. So I'm not seeing any questions come up. Like I said, if you have more questions, feel free to email us or call us. And I appreciate everybody attending today and hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you.